When the first season of Daredevil hit, it kinda blew everyone's mind. Not because of its much-touted extra helping of sex and violence to set it apart from the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, though that was certainly novel and eyebrow-raising, but because of that, plus it turned out to be really, really good. Granted, at this point it feels like Marvel is either getting to that Pixar point where they're so consistently excellent at what they do, or that Star Wars, Rocky, James Bond point where what they do has created such a permanent cultural niche for itself that it's difficult to apply the same kind of conventional criticism to them that you apply to everything else, but it was worrisome all the same that they were going to try building a whole new venture around the dark and gritty superhero thing, a recurring trend in the medium that always manages to produce one or two clever works shortly before driving the whole genre into a fucking ditch. In other words, when you pair that with the mixed results of Marvel's TV division thus far, it almost felt like someone had practically gift-wrapped this to be the moment when Marvel finally actually fucked something up. I mean, Jesus, even their bad movies up to this point are still better than some other bad movies I could name. But then Daredevil came out, and pretty much across the board, the reaction was, holy shit, this is good. I like this cast, it's got all kinds of intrigue and drama and crime stuff, it's super violent in that nasty Tony Scott 80s cop movie kind of way, and the writing really pops, and I like all these gangster characters, and they've obviously put a ton of work into these fight scenes, and it clicks together so damn well, you hardly even notice that Charlie Cox doesn't really seem to have much range as an actor, or chemistry with anyone in the cast, or that they make you wait until the last episode for him to get his costume, and it kinda sucks when he does, like really, really sucks, and then the story drags in the middle, and there's a shitload of plot and actually very little story, or that Jessica Jones came out afterwards doing a lot of the same shtick, but somehow felt like it was made for and by adults and not angry 10-year-olds dressed up in dad's clothes, and wait a second, why do I remember season 1 being so good again? Oh, right, exactly. Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin was such a perfect fucking character. Seriously, hands down the best Marvel villain and probably the acting MVP of the entire Marvel universe at this point, that the sheer magnitude of his presence didn't just overshadow and overwhelm Season 1's flaws, it literally filled in the cracks and spackled over them. For example, that whole thing in Season 1 where Daredevil solves the big mystery of the season in the first couple episodes, but then we have to watch Karen, Foggy, and Ben Urich try to solve it again on their own. Yeah, you barely even notice that the first time because all the stuff they're investigating leads back to more Kingpin. Hell, he's so damn compelling that when he finally shows up for a 2-episode guest spot in this season, it's hard not to want him to stick around and swallow everything up all over again, even though he's right in the middle of all the Punisher stuff and everything about the Punisher fucking rules. Daredevil Season 2 has pretty much the exact opposite problem. Overall, it's probably better all around than the first season. There's an actual fully realized storyline with sensible character arcs for everyone involved. There's several genuine mysteries that are legitimately intriguing with mostly agreeable payoffs. It doesn't sag as much in the middle episodes, which is an improvement for almost any Netflix show, and it feels like there's a lot of pretty interesting world building being laid out for, one has to assume, the Defenders. Hell, even Daredevil's costume kind of gets a little less terrible when there's enough light to be able to see it, which is practically never, granted. So yeah, good stuff, but not without flaws. Unfortunately, whereas last time said flaws were papered over by one great element, this time they're all highlighted and exacerbated by one terrible element, and that terrible element, shockingly, is Elektra, who is easily the worst adapted character the Marvel Cinematic Universe has yet attempted and might even belong somewhere near the semi-tolerable end of a roster of its worst characters, period. And the tragedy is, you can really tell because she doesn't show up for about 4 or 5 episodes, before which the season is straight up awesome because everything is all about the Punisher, and the Punisher stuff, again, fucking rules. Fortunately, his story keeps going and kind of extends across the whole rest of the season, but yeah, every time we cut away to deal with the Elektra storyline, it just feels like such a huge deflating distraction, which, to be fair, is kind of the point of the story this time, so kudos for doing the job perhaps a little too well, I guess. Our arc this time around is that it's a year later and Matt Murdock has settled into his comfy routine of lawyering to the indigent by day and punching his crime-ridden neighborhood into behaving itself by night, but now suddenly he has to deal with not only gangsters, but a rival vigilante who'd rather just straight up murder everyone in Manhattan who's ever so much as nodded approvingly in the direction of organized crime. Now Daredevil can't abide that, but as Matt Murdock, he also ends up defending the Punisher, aka Frank Castle, in his murder trial because he's pretty sure the city is trying to cover up something about the gangland shooting incident that figures in Big Pun's standard family killed in Crossfire origin story, but then Murdock keeps fucking up the case because he's distracted every other night by the reappearance of his crazy hot, but also just plain crazy ex-girlfriend who needs his help taking down a cult of magical ninjas that apparently never went away from last season. Now that right there is a really good outline for a season of a TV show about Daredevil, not just plot-wise, but thematically. If they really are going to insist on sticking with the premise of Murdock as a walking avatar of uniquely Irish Catholic masochistic martyr complex, you're not going to find a better literalization of of that theme than making the pretext for the superhero stuff he keeps shirking his grown-up job and potential emotionally healthy love interest for than an exotic temptress archetype he just can't say no to. I mean, that's pretty goddamn basic stuff, and the male psyche hasn't changed that much since Frank Miller thought up Elektra in the first place. Problem number one, though, is that Elektra, as in the specific Marvel character Elektra, is nowhere to be found in Season 2's Baker's dozen of episodes. Oh, there's a character called Elektra, and to her credit, Elodie Yung has a lot of raw charisma and struggles mightily to do something with the unbelievably stupid character they've given her to play, but along with being stupid, said character is completely unrecognizable as Elektra. And no, I'm not just saying that because she never wears the costume, although the one she does wear somehow manages to be worse than Daredevil's, which is kind of an impressive bar to not clear. It'd be one thing if this radical reimagining of Elektra was at least interesting in her own right, but instead she's the absolute worst kind of female character, the kind who has no interior life, no exterior existence, or even function in the plot apart from the needs, wants, and projections of the male cast. The original Elektra may have been conceived top to bottom as a concentrated collection of Frank Miller's hang-ups and fetishes, but at least she had agency and an agenda, indeed an identity of her own, informed and driven by her own, however poor, decisions. This version of Elektra, on the other hand, has no such thing. In her new origin story, everything important about her, from her martial arts training to her attitude, to her initial relationship with Daredevil in the first place, to her reemergence in the present, turns out to all have been manipulated and managed by Scott Glenn's stick. And not only that, he supposedly did so in order to stop her from being instead manipulated and managed by, yep, her destiny, which here involves a really dumb payoff to the leftover Black Sky mystery involving the Hand from Season 1, and yes, it's as stupid as it sounds. And that's a shame, because the stupidity of everything surrounding Elektra really does creep in and ultimately overwhelm the Punisher storyline, which is awesome and really should have remained the whole focus. Jon Bernthal is quite simply extraordinary as the best version of Frank Castle ever. Let me be clear about that. Ray Stevenson and Lexi Alexander's Punisher Warzone remains the most faithful adaptation of the original Punisher comics, and I love it to death just like I love those comics, but what Bernthal and the makers of Daredevil have done is something next level, actually attempting to make Castle a three-dimensional character beyond the one-note Paul Kersey, Mac Bolan, Brian Mills, righteous murder machine fantasy that birthed him. The key is that they don't try to make the Punisher cool. Oh, he's a badass, and people are gonna love him, and Marvel would be nuts not to have already agreed to give Bernthal his own series and/or movie, but there's a deliberate lack of self-conscious style to his mannerisms and his actions that demonstrate a deliberate choice to avoid making him an action hero. He doesn't have catchphrases, he doesn't strike poses, there's no sense of irony or gimmickry to how he takes out his target, and on the very few occasions that we get a glimpse of who he might have been beforehand, the general impression is mostly an exceptional but not legendary soldier and a normal, probably even sort of boring suburban family man. What makes him interesting is contrasting that with what he's become, and Bernthal does amazing work making it feel like everyone is in immediate danger every time this guy is on screen. He is fucking scary. Hell, he even has the one thing virtually no one else in the cast does, actual chemistry with Charlie Cox's Daredevil. Don't get me wrong, Cox was fine in the first season, and he's still just fine here, but they still haven't solved the problem of Daredevil being the least interesting person on his own show, thematically and in terms of presentation. The fight scenes are just as brutal and less obviously choreographed this time around, but it's mostly the same brawls in the same underlit hallways from Season 1. Seriously, Daredevil loves his underlit hallways like the Power Rangers love their rock quarries. And they don't really change up until he finally gets his adjustable billy club from the comics in the final episode. More amusingly, the producers are so clearly in love with him as the bleeding, gasping, brutalized, suffering savior that there's almost zero logic at play concerning the training and strength level of the fighters. Daredevil gets his ass kicked in almost every fight, even though he usually walks away the default winner, and it seems to be just as brutal and physically taxing for him to defeat a handful of pissed-off bikers as it does to fend off 50 or 60 highly trained hand assassins. Cox is doing what he can, but it feels like both seasons' worth of showrunners just aren't interested in developing Matt Murdock beyond a costumed embodiment of working-class Catholic self-penance. He wants to met out vigilante justice, but he needs to do it in a way that almost kills him to pay off the guilt. We get it, we got it the first time. Please find something additional for him to fucking be about between now and the Defenders. I mean, what else is a shared universe for if not being able to say, okay, sure, here's a one-dimensional character, but maybe if we bounce him off 30 or 40 other one-dimensional characters, eventually they'll all get more interesting. It probably sounds like I'm ragging on this season and this series in general, and I should stress I'm really not. Apart from the existing issues with the costuming and the pacing and the lighting, or lack thereof, and the huge Elektra-shaped dead weight dragging down the back half, I actually really dig and have a lot of fun with Daredevil, including some of the stuff that doesn't totally work. Daredevil is the most serious Marvel production so far, which paradoxically makes it the silliest Marvel production more often than not. I mean, we're supposed to laugh during Ant-Man, but as much as I enjoyed Ant-Man, none of the intentionally funny parts in it were anywhere near as funny as watching Cox's Daredevil seethe and glower and clench his fists and grit his blood-stained teeth with all the turgid solemnity of an angst-ridden middle schooler determinedly etching Pantera lyrics into his algebra textbook while the soundtrack thunders and rages with funereal self-importance while up on screen he's doing rhythmic Cirque du Soleil kickflips with a bunch of ninjas straight out of a fucking Godfrey Ho movie against the backdrop of a cartoon anachronism of Hell's Kitchen circa 1982. Intentional or not, that kind of mismatched tonal whiplash is right the hell up my alley. The great thing about the Marvel productions in general is that they afford so many different entertainment experiences. Jessica Jones made me think, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is a nice mellow distraction, the Avengers movies are, at their best, inspiring, and I fully expect Civil War to be a fucking emotional roller coaster. Daredevil, 2 seasons in, mostly feels like a weird, nasty, lurid footnote to the whole thing, but a generally well-made one that occasionally, as in the case of the Punisher this season, manages genuine greatness. I really wish they hadn't tried to force Elektra in this time around, or rather, I wish they hadn't decided to name this completely unrelated, boring new character Elektra, but there's more than enough to recommend making Season 2 worth your time. So even if you're completely burnt out on superheroes at this point, which is totally understandable by now, I'd say definitely check this one out.